Okay, hello. In this video, I am going to explain the request and response structure to the transaction status processor. Till now, I have created this transaction DTO class for this is a data transfer object. This DTO type object is used to uh, transfer the data from one class to another class or from one method to another method. So this is the transaction DTO class, and this is our create transaction request. Now first let's go to the payment controller class. What we have done till now, this is the create transaction. When we post the request for this create transaction, the transaction request comes here, which is in JSON body. So we need this request body to receive it. Then we are calling this create transaction method, and we are passing this create transaction request to the payment service. Here it comes here, create transaction request. Now see, here we are setting this transaction ID, and yes, and we are passing it. See, we are sending this request till the create transaction method of this payment service IMPL, and to make it to save to the database, we have to pass this request till the transaction status processor. So first we have to observe that what fields we are needed to save the transaction into the field, what fields we needed. Okay, so this is our transition this is our transaction status processor. So see, what the for creating the transaction, for creating a transaction or to save the transaction inside the database, we have to first observe that what fields we are needed to save the information. So these fields we needed: create transaction request, plus we need this is all coming in the create transaction request, and that is nothing but this is all the incoming request. In addition to that, we are for saving the transaction inside the database, we need the transaction status ID and the transaction reference. So these details we are needed. That means plus this create transaction request, these fields plus these two fields extra we need for the saving payment to the transaction status processor. So what we are doing, we created a transaction DAO class with these all fields, transition DAO, so that these all fields come together and we can send it to the transaction status processor. But for creating the transition DAO, as we know, our transaction status processor, this is an interface. This is an interface and it has only one abstract method, that is process status, and it has three child classes: created status, initiated status, and pending status processor. So for now we are coding for the created status processor. For the created status processor we need this much fields: 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 and to 9. We need these 9 fields. These are coming as an incoming request and these two are generated by our should be generated by the processing service system. So we cannot just add these 9 fields inside the transition inside this transaction inside this transaction DAO, because where we are passing it to the transaction status processor, and transaction status processor has three child classes: the created, initiated, and pending. So we have to take in consideration all the child classes and its requirement, and we have to set the request format and then send it to this. What we have to do, we need to pass all the data to this process status. Yes, so that the method of the created status processor can receive it and it can save in the database. So we cannot directly pass it to the process status method of the created status processor, because this is an interface and this is the overridden method. So we need to have some object structure which makes sense to all the use cases: for created, for pending, for initiated, for success, and for failed. So this is where the need of DTO is come in picture. So we are creating the transition DTO object so that we can pass all the fields to this transition status process status method, and the child class of this take only the required fields from the from that request, from that DTO object. So we are doing this. So we have created the transition DTO which contains all the fields for all the use cases. Yes, DTO is also called as the business model. This is the business model. So we have to implement this structure. Yes, and see, we can send as the request, we can send this object of the transition DAO as a request, and we can also, means DAO can be behave as an input, behave as a request, as well as it can be the output, means it can be the response from the transaction status processor. So DAO can be act as both request and response. Yes, now what we have to do, we have already created this transition DTO here. So let's go back to the payment controller, this here. Yes, we are sending this transaction request to the create transaction. Let's go to the implementation class, payment service implementation. Here we are receiving this create transaction request here. Okay, now what we have to do, we have to inject here private final transition transaction DTO transaction DTO. Yes, already we have annotated it with required arc constructor. That means this transaction DTO object is injected inside the constructor of this payment service implementation. Now we have these fields. Now create transaction request, and we have this, we have to create these two, transaction status ID and transaction reference. So what we have to do, okay, here we are passing the transaction status ID, and here we also pass the string transaction reference. Yes, and for this transaction reference we are using UUID logic for generating the transaction reference. So how to generate it? Transaction reference, which is equal to UUID dot random UUID dot to string, because we want it in a string format. So this will generate the universally unique identifier. Universally unique identifier. Okay, UUID is nothing but uh, the unique ID across the network, across the database, and across the service. So we can there is very low possibility of clashing this ID with another ID uh, across the network. And then here we set the transaction ID to 1, and now we are setting this transaction ID of the DTO. Okay, now what we have to do, we have to transfer this, convert this transaction create transaction request and map it to the transaction DTO. Means we have to convert this into this, and we have to also add two more fields, right? Transaction status ID and transaction reference. So first let's map this transaction request to the, convert this object, means get these values. That means what we have to do is, see, we have to this create transaction request dot get user ID, and after getting this user ID we have to set it to the transaction DTO's user set user ID. Yes, we have to do this. We have to get all these request parameters, and we have to set the required fields. So get the user ID and set the user ID, get the payment method ID of this object and set it to the transaction DTU's payment method ID. So in this way we have to set all these seven, we have to retrieve all these seven fields by using the get method of this transaction request and set it to the transaction DTO object. So for this conversion, the Spring Boot framework provides the model mapper library. This model mapper library reads data from one object and sets the values into another object. So we don't have to do it manually. So rather than writing these 7 get and set statements, we can do it by using the model mapper. So for using the model mapper, using the model mapper, I have added the POM dependency for the model mapper here in pom.xml. This is the dependency for using the model mapper, which is generally used for the conversions. So let's go back to the implementation class. Okay, here. So here what we have to do is use the model mapper. So for using the model mapper, we have to do the auto configuration for this. So I'm creating a new class called app-config. I'm adding it inside the config package. So here what we have to do is we have to annotate it with configuration, and here we have to create a bean. Bean of what? Model mapper. Yes, and return new model mapper. This is. Now what we have to do, let's go back here, and here we have to inject this model mapper. Private model mapper, adjust the packages, and yes, here. Now how to do this is, what we have to do, model mapper dot map. What we have to map, the source is create transaction request, and we have to convert this into the transaction DTO. Yes, so it returns the object of the transaction DTO. So we are saving it inside the object of transaction DTO, txn DTO. create transaction request and transaction. Okay, transaction DTO. The class name is transaction DTO dot class. Let's save it. Okay, let's check it once that it is working or not. So run as maven build clean spring boot run. Yes, build success. Application failed to start. Okay, let's make some changes into the config. No. TO, yes, we have converted here. Here I'm putting the log.info map transition DTO. Then I'm setting the status ID. Okay, status ID is 1, and here I'm setting the transaction. Okay, the object of the transaction DTO. Yes, I have used here this transaction DTO. Okay, let's save it, and first see it is running or not. Spring Boot app. Parameter 1 of constructor required a type could not be found. Okay, yes, it is started. Okay, let's remove this from here, save it. Let's check it is what it. Okay, this is a this is a error of model mapper mapping. Because this model mapper is null, payment transaction. Cannot invoke this model mapper because this model mapper is null. Okay, where is the app config? Okay, return new model mapper. And let's go back here. Okay, it is compulsory to make it final so that it can injected into the constructor. Let's resend this request. Now multiple source property hierarchy configuration error. Model mapper configuration error. Yes, set id matches multiple source property. Okay, here is the problem, that our create transaction request and our transaction DTO has a field named ID, and actually this ID field matches with all these ID fields. So model mapper get confused that that ID, which value of this field map to that ID. So in the destination object we have ID, but in source object we have 4 types of ID matching fields. For this we have to use the strict matching strategy of the model mapper, and for this we have to make some changes. Here we have to create the model mapper object of the model mapper, and we have to return the created object, and we have to add some configurations. Model mapper dot get configuration dot here oh dot set matching strategies dot strict matching strategies dot strict, and we have to set skip null enabled true, and we have to return this model mapper. So what is this strict matching strategy? This strategy only maps the matching fields. So let's save it. What happened here? Okay, let's go back to this, save it. Okay, re-execute it, run as Spring Boot app. Okay, what happened now? Model mapper okay, let's check the model mapper once again. Model mapper, we have to get the configuration dot set matching strategies dot strict, and we have to set the skip null enabled true and return the model mapper. Yes, it is right. Annotated with configuration, and we are making this bin. Let's save this. Map transaction. Okay. Yes, we have to create here transaction DTO is equal to new transaction DTO. No, duplicate local variable. Okay. Save it. Okay. Mm, what is the error? Configuration class enhancer. Okay, let's ask the chat GPT about this, that it is right or not. Okay. I am applying strict matching strategy. Is it right? Oh, dot strict to your model mapper configuration. So this line is calling the method recursively. So fix the code like this. Copy this code and let's go back here, paste it. Okay, save it and let's check it whether it is working or not. Run as Spring Boot app. Yes. Okay, this is working now. So model mapper is working. Let's see, send this. Yes, processed, created status, and let's check the logs here. Yes, create transaction called the create transaction request. Yes, we have to see. Yes, this mapped transaction DTO, ID null, user ID, and all these fields. Yes, now we have to set this transaction reference and the transaction status ID field of the transaction DTO. So let's go back to the payment service implementation. Here int transaction status ID is 1. Now set it transaction DTO dot set transaction ID is transaction status ID. Yes, and here we are using this UUID concept for generating the unique ID, and after that we have to set transaction DTO dot set transaction reference to this. I am extracting this into the separate method. So refactor extract method is generate unique ID or unique ID generator. Okay. This is unique ID generator which generates the unique ID and set it to the transaction reference, and we are setting this transaction reference to this transaction DTO's transaction reference field. Okay, let's save it and let's check it once that these are mapping or not. So here I'm logging one. log.info that final transaction DTO before processing payment, or final transaction DTO. Save it. Let's check it. Yes. Okay, let's send the request and check the final transaction DTO. User ID, yes, transaction status ID is mapped to 1, and the transaction reference is this UUID. Where is that? This is transaction reference unique ID. So what is UUID? UUID actually it is a universally unique identifier. Yes, it is actually 128-bit value. Let's see. UUID, it is 128-bit value, or we can say 16-byte value. Yes, it is used to uniquely identify something across the systems, across the, we can say, databases, and across the network without needing the central authority. Before that, Redis is used as a central mechanism which identifies that which makes sure that no one IDs get clashes with each other. So UUID is the concept, it widely used in the software system where we want to generate a unique ID that will not clash even if generated on the different machine. So this is the concept of UUID. So we are using this UUID concept for generating the transaction reference. So we have generated this transaction DAO. Now we have to pass this transaction DAO up to the transaction status processor. So let's update this. Yes, string response payment status service process payment. What is process payment? Here the payment service. Okay, rather than sending the status ID, we have to send this transaction DTO object. Yes. Now we have to update this, that we are passing here the transaction DTO object. Yes, let's save it. Let's go to the implementation class of it. Here now we are receiving the object of transaction DTO. Yes, so here we are updating this log, that log.info, not nullable process payment, no, process payment called from payment with, yes, transaction DTO. Let's save it. Here we are passing the transaction status ID to the get status processor. So we are passing get transaction status ID to this get status processor. Yes, here also we are receiving Yes, it was correct na, integer transaction status ID. Okay, so here we are getting the object of the child class inside this ref and ref dot process status, and to this process status we have to pass transaction transaction DTO object. Save it and update this, that we are receiving the transaction DTO object here. Save it and let's go to the child classes of it. So here we are receiving transaction DTO object and updating this log that this is transaction DTO I am getting here. Then let's go back here, let's update the second child here, transaction DTO, and let's update the log. Yes, here, save it, adjust the packages, save it. Let's go back and open the third child and make here the transition DTO, and yes, process. Let's save it, adjusting this. Okay, so transaction DTO is set to the pending status. Okay, let's check it once. So send this. Yes, here the response is received, but what about here? Okay, let's debug it so that we can get the clear idea about it. Debug as Spring Boot app. So let's open the payment controller. Okay, let's set the first breakpoint here. Then we are calling this transaction, create transaction, the implementation. Here we're setting the second, then model mapper. Okay, generate this to see the final transaction DTO, and then let's go to the process payment implementation. Let's set here the, and next this process status. As we have already mentioned the transaction status ID 1, so I am adding breakpoint into this created status processor. Okay, let's shoot this request. Okay, here log. Okay, step over. Yes, create transaction called, and we have set this request as we have passed this in Postman as a JSON body. Then yes, this is payment service implementation. To the implementation class the request is reached properly. Then we have mapped this with the help of model mapper. So mapped transaction DTO, this map transaction DTO as ID null. Here status ID is null and transaction reference is also null. So let's see the final DTO object. Let's resume this. Yes, final DTO is, yes, transaction ID 1 and reference this UUID. Yes, this is okay. Next, to get status processor, yeah, this is okay. Just step over. Yes, get status processor called with transaction ID 1. Yes, next, here object received, okay, created. See, this created status processors object is received. Next, process status called from created status processor. Yes, object is received here. Suspend or terminate. Here's the resume. Okay, terminating this. Okay, let's close this, and now let's run it as a Spring Boot app. Oh shit, started. So should this request, process status called. Yes, so I'm returning this here. Okay, let's check other. This created status processor returning what? Now we said that it returns the transaction DTO object. For this we have to update this to transaction DTO. Copy this. Let's go to the, and here update this. Let's update this because we are sending the request till the processor classes. Now we are forming the responses. So let's update for transaction DTO. Return type is incompatible with, okay, transaction DTO. Let's save it. Now let's save it. Okay, go to the next child here. So it's transaction DTO, and let's return the transaction DTO. Let's save it. Let's go back, update the next child, transaction DTO, and return here transaction DTO. Save it. Let's go back. This process status called from, okay, F3, the implementation, then this process payment, the implementation class here. Yes, this is process status. Yes, we have updated here. Now we are receiving response in the form of transaction DTO. So let's save it. So process status response transaction DTO, and we are sending this response so we have to update this return type. Save it. Let's go to the process payment, this process status service. Here we have to update this. Save it. Save here too. Now yes, go back. Yes, here this process payment returns the transaction DTO object, and we are returning this DTO object, so we have to update this also. Save it. Let's go to the payment service and update this string to transaction DTO. Let's save all. So we are forming all the responses here. Let's check it. Send. Error, mismatch, cannot convert. Okay, we have updated till the payment service. Control Shift R, implementation. So create transaction is called from payment controller, and here we have to update this, and we have to update the return type. Let's save it. Okay, now let's check. Yes, it is started. Okay, let's stop it and let's run it as a Spring Boot app. Yes, it is started. Now we are shooting the post request. Yes, we are getting this response, but for this create transaction we need only two fields, that transaction status ID and the transaction reference. We don't need all this information, so we are the aim is we only get the two fields into this response. So for this we have to create one new class inside the Pojo, that create response, create transaction response. Finish it, and let's go to the transaction DTO object. One type transaction DTO. So what we need is transaction ID. Let's copy it. Let's go back here, transaction ID, and we need this transaction reference field. Let's copy, go back here. Yes, we just need these two fields in our response. Annotate it with Lombok's data annotation. Let's save it. Now what we have to do is payment service implementation class. Let's go here. Here we are getting the transaction DTO object as a response. So let's convert this object to the create transaction response. So for this we have to use this model mapper. But how to use this model mapper? We have the source is response, yes, and the destination is create transaction response dot class. And here we have to mention create transaction, oh sorry, response transaction response. Now we are returning this transaction response. Save it. So as we are returning the object of create transaction response, so we have to update the return data type here, and we have to update in the payment service interface. Yes, here. Let's save it. Let's save it here also and go back to the controller. This create transaction returns the response as the create transaction response object. So we have to update this also. Let's save it. Let's go to the create transaction. Let's save all. Okay, let's check now that we are getting only 2 fields here or not. So I'm shooting this. Oh, what is the error? Create transaction payment service IMPL. Okay, here, yes, model mapper dot map this response. Okay, we are getting this transaction DTO response. So what is the error? Syntax, oh, semicolon is missing here. Semicolon. Let's save it. Okay, started successfully, and let's shoot this once again. Yes, now we are getting the required fields, transaction status ID and the transaction reference. So in this video I have formed the request and response structure for this create transaction. Okay, thank you.